All right. So, in the last couple of weeks, we've had several questions about our program, Helper School. So, I figured I'd do an episode, maybe two, answering all of the questions that people normally have when they are joining a program. Who is it for? Who is it not for? What do you walk away with? Et cetera, et cetera. I might end up doing two different episodes. If this gets too long, you all know that I am anti long podcasts. So I'm thinking about separating the FAQs into a separate episode. So we'll see how it goes. All right. So here's my overall thought here. Most people are doing business wrong. Okay. They're treating it more like being in a war than playing chess. And I won't get into my soapbox in this particular episode about the difference between the two. You can check out the episode. It's going to say something about doing business wrong in the title, or it might probably say something about war versus chess. That's probably in the title. But what I will say is that the fact that people are doing business wrong is the reason why I work with pivoters. Okay. When I work with pivoters, I really don't have to convince them that something needs to change, right? They're already in a place where they know something needs to change. Whether, even if they're being forced to change, let's say something shifted in their industry, like DEI stuff or whatever it might be, or whether they actually said, you know what, I want something different. Either way, I don't have to convince them. And I love that for me. What I do have to do is just to show them how to play chess, i.e., how to change, which is the place that I love to be in. Okay. In short, the Helper School is basically a 90-day program for seasoned entrepreneurs who are pivoting or want to pivot for that matter, and just need a space to redesign the next chapter of their business. So the program is very small group. There's always around 10 people or less in the group. The primary focus of the group is clarity. It is people who are looking for direction. A lot of times when people are pivoting, they are clear about one or two things in their pivot. Like they might be really clear about their mission or what they're building next. Sometimes they're not clear about what they're building next. But typically they're not clear about all the pieces. What is my product going to be, or what is my service going to be, or how should I price my offer or their positioning, right? So the primary focus is around clarity and direction. And what you walk away with, which I'll go into more detail about as I lay things out, is what we call your personalized pivot plan, right? Because here's what makes pivoting unique when you are a more seasoned entrepreneur, right? Because it is different. It is different to be going from employee to entrepreneur, right? Meaning I haven't run a business, right? And I'm stepping into entrepreneurship, which is a pivot within itself. It's a completely different pivot, at least emotionally, when you are pivoting after having been in business for 10 years or 5 years or 20 years or whatever, right? And what I find is when you are a more seasoned entrepreneur and you are pivoting, it is often harder. I've worked with aspiring coaches, I've worked with seasoned coaches, I've worked with seven-figure coaches, like the whole gamut over the course of my entrepreneur career. And I find that my seasoned entrepreneurs who are pivoting actually have a really hard time and they are likely to get stuck in transition. And I think it's because you're clear enough. This is probably the way I would say it. You're probably experienced enough to know what it takes, but also tired enough to not want to get it wrong. And what I find is that when my people are already executors, they don't typically struggle with execution. Now, they might struggle with executing on the right thing. They might struggle with burnout. They might struggle with all kinds of things connected to execution. But what I find is that when they are clear, they execute faster and much more effectively. And when you are not clear, you tend to execute much slower, right? And that's the primary problem that we're wanting to solve here. Okay. So this is a program for you if you are, number one, a seasoned entrepreneur. We define season as 5 years plus. Most of our clients have been in business for 10 years. Some have been all the way to 40, right? But minimum would be 5 years. We want you to be an expert, right? So you know your thing, whatever your expertise is. Doesn't really matter whether you, so like I have a client who is in e-commerce, which this program would probably not be. He's a one-on-one client, but he is moving from e-commerce to a more service-based, expert-based business. So even though he's not in an expert-based business model per se, so he's not a coach or consultant, he's definitely an expert in his craft. He knows he's in the, why can't I think of it, Lord Jesus? He has a t-shirt brand and he also customizes shoes. That's what he does. Okay. So he could still be an expert even though he's not a coach or consultant, is my point. Okay. So we want you to be an expert in your thing because we will definitely not be promoting people building businesses who don't know what they're talking about. The reason why you're pivoting does not matter, right? People pivot for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they're personal, like divorce or caretaking roles change or health scares, burnout, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes the reason is more professional, like the industry changes. Think of all the AI stuff or the DEI stuff or the tariffs or all the governments. Like all of those things are less personal and much more professional, industry specific or economic. So it doesn't really matter the reason why you're pivoting because people pivot for all kinds of reasons. And the type of pivot that you probably are making in order to be a great fit for this program is something to do with your business model, could be one option, right? So maybe you're going from one-on-one to group or service provider to expert or something like that. Or you might have sold your company and are building a whole new company. We have several clients who fall in that category. Sometimes people are going from brick and mortar to online, right? Again, lots of different types of pivots. The people who are not going to be a good fit for this is if you are pivoting to an e-commerce brand. Now, if you already have an e-commerce brand, that's fine. But if you are pivoting to e-commerce, this is probably not the best place for you. If you are pivoting to SaaS software, this is also probably not the best place for you. Now, you could have those as elements of your business, but if they're your core business, then you probably need to be in a different program because those come with very different business models, right? If you are new and you are aspiring, right? You fit everything else except for the season part. This is also, I'm going to give a little caveat here, but this is also not the best program for you. And here's why. The information is almost the same. It's almost identical. And so sometimes people ask me, why is it that if the process or if the information is the same, why can't, new people join? And it's because your ability to answer the questions is not the same. The less experience that you have, the harder it is to answer some of the questions, the less likely you are to know some of the questions, and the more you are likely to need for me to teach you certain things. But if you've been in business for a while, some of the questions are still going to be hard to answer, but more from a psychological or internal place rather than an education or external place, if that makes sense. There's a big difference between I'm having a hard time choosing my business model because I don't want to let go of my team, which is more internal problem, versus I'm having a hard time choosing a business model because I don't know the difference between e-commerce or courses. See the difference there? Now, I will say this is a caveat. If we have people who are new who apply, because no matter how many times I say this program is not really for new people, they still apply. What I am thinking about doing is opening up a separate cohort specifically for that group of people. So I am going to say go ahead and apply, but just know that you would be in a different cohort than our existing people. Okay. So that gives you an overview of who this is for. Think about, let's say you were wanting someone to help you take all of the puzzle pieces, right? Because that's essentially what we're doing in this program is you already have some of the pieces to your brand already, right? There are certain elements that you're already clear about, but then there are these other pieces that you are not clear about. And our job is to help you put the puzzle pieces together so you have a very clear picture of where you're going and what you should be doing and not doing. Okay. That's probably the easiest metaphor for me to use. Probably the most important thing that I want to say in this podcast is why I created the program, right? So if we just excluded all of my soapbox reasons, right? The whole people are doing business wrong. Let's exclude those. Listen to the other podcasts if you're interested in that. But just as it relates to this program, there are a couple of reasons that really caused me to double down on this particular framework that we use, right? So, number one, the first reason is because I see people getting stuck in their pivot, meaning they decide to pivot and then 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, they still haven't fully transitioned to the new thing, right? There's not everybody falls in this category, but I'm seeing more and more people not move through the pivot, but actually get stuck in the pivot. And again, there's lots of different reasons, right? There's all kinds of reasons why people might get stuck in a pivot. But the overarching one, the two that I will name is number one, when you are a seasoned entrepreneur, you typically have too much expertise, right? Too much experience, too much education. And it becomes a lot harder to sort through because you have way more at 10 years into the game than you did when you came in at year one. And so that's one reason why people get stuck. But the other reason I think that we should be talking more about publicly is that pivoting is emotional, right? In order to pivot and pivot well, which we'll talk about that too, what I mean by it requires letting go, it requires tough decisions, it requires a level of wrestling. And so I think that's part of the reason why people get stuck. And so I created this program, one, because I see a lot of people making multiple pivots. They pivot to something and then a year later they pivot again. Or 3 years later, they haven't really come out with the new thing. They've talked about it here and there, but you can just tell that it's not quite the same. So that's the one reason. The other reason is that I find that people really want to be strategic, meaning they want the next chapter of their business to be better than the last. They want it to be easier. They want it to be simpler, right? They want it to be funner, et cetera, et cetera. They want it to be more profitable. But despite the fact that they want to be more strategic, they actually aren't more strategic, right? There is a difference. And despite the fact that they want a more effective path and simpler path, they often don't know how to achieve that on their own. And to be clear, it's because when you're pivoting, one, it's because of what I already said. They have a lot of ideas, a lot of desires, a lot of education, a lot of expertise. So it's hard to be strategic when you have a lot of things coming at you, right? But also, it becomes even more hard to be strategic because when you're pivoting, you have to make a lot of decisions. Literally, who am I going to serve? What am I going to offer? Right? Am I going to offer this lead magnet or another lead magnet? Which price point is better? It just never ends. And so it becomes challenging. You need someone to walk alongside you to not just help you get clear about the individual pieces in your puzzle, but more importantly, how to put the puzzle together in a way that actually aligns, in a way that actually gets you to the place that you want to be. So that's the second reason why I created this program, is because for the people who actually want to be more strategic, I want to be able to support them in their efforts because a lot of times they're not actually being as strategic as they would like. I think the last reason I would say is a bit more personal. It's in the seasons where I have pivoted, there was really no place to go. Like when I think about the couple of pivots that I've made over the not quite, I haven't been in business quite a decade, but almost a decade. What I find is that the things that I attempted to do to get clear were massively not helpful. Sometimes that was joining a mastermind. Sometimes that was hiring a brand strategist. Sometimes that was, we did all these things to try to get clear at different points in our pivot. And what I found over that time was that people tend to be good, like really good at one thing, right? The problem is they often position themselves to be good at many things, right? So if I join your mastermind or your program or your whatever, and I think you're going to be able to help me do these two or three things, what happens is that I get on the inside of the program and I quickly realize that you're really good at one of those things, but you're not nearly as good at the others. And so that becomes a problem because when you're pivoting, particularly like there, I just haven't found a good space for to be able to refer people or that really help people pivot well. What I find is that the brand strategists are good at messaging or they're good at visuals, depending on what their niche is. The business coaches tend to be a little bit better at marketing or at sales. Maybe the mindset coaches tend to be good at helping you manage yourself and maybe figure out what you want. But the problem is that in order to pivot, it requires all three. It's not like it's optional to have one or the other. No, it literally is required for you to be able to have all three levels. And if I was going to add a fourth, which again adds a whole nother level of complexity, is that when you're pivoting, you also need to be able to pivot in relation to what is going on currently in your industry and in the overall market. Because if you don't factor in all of those things, what I find is that, again, people make multiple pivots. And what it ends up happening, this is what we call it, is that you pivot, but you don't evolve. And the goal is literally for you to evolve. And the difference is pivoting is you just go to the next thing, right? But evolving is when you go to your next level. And we need this pivot to be your next level, not just the next thing. That's what because when you just pivot to the next thing, one of two things is what I find. People either are in survival mode or they keep shifting. And then you never feel grounded. And that's not the goal. Business is not fun if you do it that way. So, because I found that most people are not good at all four, mostly because this requires strategy. It requires not that you be well versed in every single thing on the planet, but you must have the gift of strategy. And people are just not nearly as good at that as they think they are. So, those are the couple of reasons that I created the program and also the couple of things that the program solves. But let's get a little bit more specific about what you're going to walk away with as a result of being in the program. The personalized pivot plan that I was referring to, think of it like this, right? There are all these things that you need to get clear on. So everything that you need to get clear on in order to pivot goes inside of your personalized pivot plan. So things like your offer suite, your marketing strategy, your sales strategy, things like that, your messaging, your positioning. And if you don't know the difference between messaging and positioning, go back and look at one of the episodes. I don't remember what episode number it is, but it is literally in the title, messaging versus positioning. It matters. Your differentiator. Why should people choose you? All of those things go inside of your personalized pivot plan. The other thing that goes inside of your personal pivot plan that I, again, have yet to find in my seasons of pivoting is all the things that are related to you, right? This is the stuff that we often miss as entrepreneurs, which cause us to burn out, which cause us to build things we don't like, which is all the things that have to do with you. What's the personal income that you need to bring in to your business? What's your enough number? What's your capacity? What's your purpose, et cetera, things like that. Okay. So all of those things go inside of your personal pivot plan. And we have an option for you to be able to lay it out in 3 to 12 month increments. Sometimes people get overwhelmed when we say you're going to walk away with the 12-month roadmap, and other people appreciate that, right? So we've named it the personalized pivot plan because you can set it up to where you know exactly what you're doing for the next 90 days or the next year. Now, to be clear, part of the work is long-term vision, right? It's not just about 3 or 12 months, but in terms of the execution, that can be modified based on how far out you want to look. Okay. So, from a curriculum standpoint, there are basically three main components that we are looking at. The first one we call being, which is all the stuff that have to do with you, right? So, you are really clear on your definition of success and your North Star, et cetera, all the things that I already named. The second phase is the brand, right? The brand is all the positioning and messaging and differentiation stuff that I mentioned. And then the third one is business. We often get business and brand confused as if they are the same, but business has far more to do with numbers. It has more to do with what you're offering and the price points and your marketing numbers and your sales numbers, things like that, right? So all three of those levels will be covered inside of the program. And the main differentiator, I want to give some examples that I think would bring this home. The main difference is that we're helping you align all of those pieces together. Not only are we going to make sure that you have all the pieces and that you're clear about those pieces, but the most important ingredient is that they have to go together, right? Because this is the part that I feel like gets in people's way the most. So, for example, I have a client who was in the restaurant business for, I don't know, a couple of decades. And she sold her restaurant and is now building an online business. And An example of this alignment piece is that in this second half of her life, she is looking for a particular kind of lifestyle, right? So she sold her house, she renovated her van, she travels across the country, right? Like she wants to live off the grid. Great. We love that for her. Okay. But then the business that she was choosing to build was like a digital product business. And of course, it sounds enticing because if I want to live off grid, then I also want something a little more passive. But the problem is that when you are pivoting a digital product business, number one is a volume based business and it's not passive. It feels passive because the delivery is passive, but the marketing is very active. You will not make any money with digital products if you do not have an audience. And in order to build an audience at the level of money that you need to bring in, because the average person that I'm dealing with, they need to bring in 6 figures in personal income minimum. Like they're not trying to bring in $20,000 that they take home. They're trying to bring in over 6 figures. And it's okay. It's not that digital products won't work. It will be a struggle based on the season that you're in, which is why we have a tiered approach to you actually executing on your long-term vision. Because I still think digital products are a great way to build the business, but it might not be the first step depending on your goals and, where you're personally at. So that's one example. Another person that I'm thinking of sold their brick and mortar company and is also building an online business for similar reasons. And the thing that we have to think about there is that this person, their main objective was really basically just being a philanthropist. That's what their goal is. They felt like the calling that God had put on their life was to give, right? And their business was going to be their main vehicle for allowing them to do that. Okay, great. We also love that. Okay. But again, depending on your goals determines your business model. It determines who you serve. Like all of these things have to be factored in based on whatever things that you're going after. So I could keep going. We've served people who are moving from one-to-one to group, from service provider to expert, from brick and mortar to online, from retired, right, to stepping full-time in their business, just all kinds of divorces, all kinds of stuff. You will be in good company. Here is the last maybe thing that I think might be helpful is how the program is set up. Number one, we have weekly group coaching calls, which are our Q&A style. You could either pre-submit your questions or you can submit them live. Either one is completely fine. In addition to that, though, one of the things that I'm doing is asking you questions based on what you're building, based on your submissions, right? So we have a submission process where you can submit your work and your work as in the questions that you're answering in the workbooks. Let me back up. The first part is workbook style curriculum, right? One of the things that you really need when you're pivoting is a lot more step-by-step instruction. Again, because there are a lot of decisions to be made and it can create overwhelm and decision-making fatigue. And so we try to eliminate some of that by providing instruction. Okay, do this first, do this second, get clear here. Because business really does work in a way that compounds. If you're doing it right, it will compound. And if you do it wrong, it won't, right? So number one is workbook style. Number two is weekly group coaching calls. And on those calls, I'm stress testing your strategy. So for example, when the client comes and says, all right, this is the model that I'm going to choose. I'm going to do digital products. And I say, okay, but that conflicts with what you told me last week, which is blah, blah, blah. So while your job is to bring questions, my job is to also bring questions. Okay. And then the last one is just to be able to work alongside your peers. While everybody in the program is in a different place in their pivot, right? They are still all your peers. That's why we reserve this program for seasoned entrepreneurs. So that way they can also be a level of support, right? They can provide valuable feedback and valuable interactions when you're working along people who are in a similar level of success as you, even if they're in a different stage. Okay. So if any of this interests you, there is an application process. We take a small number of people each month. Again, this is a very small program. There's always around like 10 people or less in the program. Now, so currently we take 5 people a month from an application standpoint because everybody isn't going to say yes. Eventually it will be 10 a month because what we'll be doing is adding additional time slots. And eventually this will be a program that you can only join once a quarter. That will be the next step that we go to. Once you apply, you get notified whether or not you were accepted pretty quickly. And then there are bonuses and instructions if you sign up within a certain time frame. Okay, so that's how the application process works. I am going to do a separate episode with all the frequently asked questions that we get, but also feel free to inbox me on Facebook. Right? If you have a question, you can shoot me an audio message, you can write it, whatever way you want to do it. I'm always open to questions.